with American Graphics Institute. I actually founded American Graphics Institute about 25 years ago. My background is as a designer, but I went and got my master's of science in something called human factors. Definitely, if any of you guys are familiar with their program. But I work with developers. So Figma is a design tool, but you can't be a designer and work in Figma and think like a designer. Like if you come from a design world where you've worked in Illustrator or Photoshop and then you try working like that in Figma, it just, everything breaks, right? So you have to think like a developer. So those of you who are developers, you're gonna probably catch on to some of the things I'm doing a lot more quickly than maybe somebody from design. This session is focused though on component and design. We had a full session yesterday, like 3 hours on layout, auto layout, and all that kind of stuff. We had a lot more time to go through some of those items. I'm going to cover just quickly as I build stuff. I'll talk it through, so hopefully that will help you. But it is like just focus on understanding what components are and try not to get in the weeds with other things at this point. We're sponsors. I have a table downstairs. I already have like people lined up who have questions, tutoring, whatever. It's fine. But also, we have open enrollment classes that are live. We have about 3 Figma classes a month going on, and there's an average of 6 to 8 people in each one, and it's not asynchronous live. You can mess up, and we can look at your screen, and we can help you. We have you join a team and mess around so we can watch what you're doing and help you out. It is a game changer for those of you who've been trying to learn Figma on your own, because I feel like Figma, you go out there and you try to figure it out on your own, and everyone's like up here. They're like, okay, you just take this. And you're like, what did you just take? Like, I don't even know how to get there. So it can be helpful. So this, I'm going to start out with a deck, high level, but I'm actually going to be working in Figma, building things from scratch. So this is just a high level overview, but I just want you to understand that when somebody's talking about a design system, they're not just talking about a bunch of saved type styles and components. If you are working with an organization that actually has a design system, it's like they have a page in their Figma document about their voice and how they document things and their branding specifications. Like if you ever worked in the design world in the past, we had branding books. It's like an entire book, but it also includes all the patterns that you might create and style guides for type and all that sort of stuff. And it is overwhelming. And there are some companies that we go into work with that have like 8 people who are on the design system team. Like they don't even make anything. They just manage the team and do all the building of things that people use. But if you're in a smaller organization, that shouldn't stop you from using your own design library immediately, like right away, and building up from whatever you have. So like I said, it's not just a bunch of patterns and styles. It's usually a lot more than that. It just helps keep everyone aligned. And it will cover, all sorts of things, the visual styles, colors. You can use it for accessibility, typography, everything. And of course, it helps you be consistent, keep up theming, remove redundancy. So easy once you start working with an established library that has all your items in it, because you only have to think through all the properties of what you're creating once and then reuse it over and over again. So how you start is, if you're already working, do an audit, which means just like look at the web pages or the apps you're creating. And you might want to create a document in Figma and just cut and paste a bunch of stuff, not to use as a final document, but just so that you can kind of grab all the things that you think you're going to reuse, whether it's like a masthead or buttons or a form or whatever, but like get all the stuff together that you think you're going to use over and over again. This is, again, a really different thing than most designers understand, because we would go into Illustrator and make something, and even though you could save component like objects with graphic objects, a lot of us didn't at the time. And if you wanted multiple buttons, you just held down your Option key or Alt key and cloned it, and nothing was an instance, and nothing had
we didn't have the ability to go back to one object and update it and then have it kind of reflect the changes through everything. We had to find things. I can't even work in Illustrator anymore. It drives me nuts. And I wrote the classroom in the book 2 versions of that for Adobe, and now I can't even get in there. It just drives me crazy. So anyway, you want to make sure that if you are starting this on your own, that you name things, make really good, short, meaningful names. Not that they can't be changed later. It won't screw anything up. But you don't want to call things frame 3, for instance, or finally done, or think this is it, like all the stuff that we got away with if you're a designer, because you are now working directly with development. And so I tell people to name things that reflect meaning. Also work with, if you are the developer, and you're also working in Figma, come up with some sort of naming system on your own so it's consistent, whether it's like, we're always camel case or lowercase, we always use hyphens or underscores. And if you're working with other people on your team, make sure that they know that, because otherwise it's just, there are ways of categorizing content in Figma. And if you're not on the same page, things are going to be kind of loose and going all over the place. So some people use this function, what the category is, what the use is, and what the function. And so like if you see at the bottom, button underscore primary underscore default, it's whatever you want. Like you just have to come up with your system, but it's a really good idea to start this. And again, even if you've been working in Figma 2 years and you've got a bunch of sites up and running, you can still change the name really easily of these things. And we always tell people, keep the actual state names, don't call, something weird. Like if it's because they're hovering, put hover in the name, disabled, enabled, lots of things. So there's also, I'll talk about this and I'll show you as I create, like I said, in 45 minutes or less, I'm going to create a mini little design library. I'll show you how you can categorize further beyond names with sections and frames. And also there's some really cool capabilities that allow you to rename things all at once. I don't have this link working, but I just want to suggest that if you are building a design system, go out and do a Google search for Spotify design system or Shopify's design system. They actually open it up and let you see, what they've done. And it's really cool to see how they organized it, but you'll realize that it is not just a bunch of components clumped in a Figma document, that it's a little bit more than that. And if you're working with something really complex, you might have to, put more names with hyphens throughout as you save things. And another thing I'm going to talk about today is using design tokens. So components are saved in a design library, styles are saved in a design library, as well as what are called variables. Variables are considered design tokens, and they're used at a high level so that, let's say that you have a button that's gold and it's used in 1,000 different screens, and you just go in and you change the color at that component level. When you're creating it, you're going to have to go back and find that color. Its use, you can update it quickly in styles, but tokens give you a higher level to go up to and make quick changes to, and also you can use alias, all sorts of things. Design tokens are also used for spacing and sizing. So if you always want 12-point corners or padding that's 20-point or whatever, you can define all that stuff there so that people aren't just like randomly pulling things in and out and using odd numbers, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, and make sure, just a note, make sure you're not calling things like sunset orange, powder blue. Like if you are creating colors that you're going to save, the pattern that has been established pretty much right now are for naming colors in variables, and I'll go and I'll actually create them for you. But you'll see that they use numbers to define how much black or white is in the color. So like red _10, red _100. Some people use
100 to 1,000, whatever, but
Again, it helps to transfer to somebody that if they're using red_50, that it is actually like a 50% of the solid red. Okay, so I talked about size tokens. I'll show you how that works as well. So let me just dive in. And if you guys, you're not following along or anything, so we should be pretty good. But if you want me to repeat something, let me know. If we end up going down in the weeds too much, then I'll say, meet me at my table downstairs and we'll go over this more. But I'm just starting with a blank canvas, and I'm going to pretend that I'm a designer, and I'm going to just like put a page together, not even thinking of the proper way to do it, but just building things that as I'm working, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to use this again. So I'm going to make it a component. So this is going to be a really simple library, but I think this is the way that a lot of people work, is they just discover as they're building what they're going to do. I do suggest, if you don't have balsamic wireframes, that you spend the $80 for the lifetime version and you build things in here first before Figma, because if you are building in Figma and you're using auto layout and all that stuff, and you go to move something, what's it do? Like everything goes boing, it all like springs apart. Whereas this product, I'm not selling it or anything, but this product, I can just go in and be like, oh, quick add. I want to add a button, and I want that button. I'm going to use a button bar, and that button bar is going to say cat, dog, fish, and I'm going to make it this size. And so like it makes it really easy for you to just build stuff out, almost like you're sketching, but yet it's interactive and it creates clickable PDFs that will go from screen to screen. Anyway.
Can you repeat the name of that?
Yeah, it's balsamic wireframes. And if you look it up, they have a monthly version that can be shared, or you can spend $79 and get the desktop version and never have to pay for it again. So a lot of developers love this because it gives you kind of a language you can work with between people. But the reason I say this is because if you do something this way, then you're already noticing things that are going to need to be components, right? Like before you go into Figma, you are finding out what are repeated elements, what you're going to use, like styles and all sorts of things. Okay, so I'm just going to close that and go back and start from scratch. I am just pressing F to create a frame. When you press F, you give all the properties down the right, and they give you a bunch of templates. You don't have to use them. I'm just going to choose to use an iPhone 16 right now, just to give me something to work on. If you are working in Figma correctly, you will not be ever using a rectangle unless you're using it for placing an image, and you'll never group. Okay, neither one of those things are acceptable in Figma. And real quickly, just a reason why. If I just pressed O and I'm just option dragging or alt dragging. If I select these items and I group them, I have no properties to work with in the background there. And I'm not having, I'm having a reaction where it's resizing, but that's totally different than what I want. If I press Command backspace or Control delete, it ungroups. That also unframes. So if you ever frame something by accident and you need to undo it, it's the Control backspace or Command delete. But instead of doing a group, I'm going to right click and just choose something frame selection. And when you frame the selection, you actually have something that you can fill, that you can round corners on. Like it gives you this object, but it also gives you constraints. You'll see these little blue lines in here when I pull this separately. And those blue lines are indicating where it's pinned. And so I can say, no, pin it up here. And pin this one over here, and then put this guy, always pin him in the center. So groups don't give you this, but you'll see that like now if I resize this, do you see it's like responsive? Like you can't do that with a group, right? So that's just a frame. And then obviously what I'm going to be using as I'm building everything is auto layout. And That's just a frame. I can come over here to a layout and say, no, add auto layout. And then it does either down or across or wrap, depending upon what I've got selected, which is also responsive. So you'll see, like if you were to look at my files, everything is auto layout. I don't even use frame for anything, because if this drives you crazy, the fact that it, like aligns like that, you can go into one object and apply absolute positioning and still put something wherever you want, or undo that and it goes back in. Make sense? Okay, so that's as much as I'm doing on that, because I want to get into my component thing. But I think that's big to understand. So I'm going to create a button, and you'll notice that I follow like Brad Frost's whole concept of building things from atom to molecule. And so I'm going to start by just pressing T, and I'm going to click and let go. The reason I'm clicking and let go, because if I look over in the properties, when you click and let go, it does auto width, which means that if I'm building buttons, they're bigger or smaller than ever run to the second line. And so you don't click and drag a text box. And I'm just pressing the escape key to go back to just having this selected. And I'm pressing, what do I press to do the auto layout? Shift A. Yeah, Shift A. So the keyboard shortcut, or you can right click and say add auto layout. But that, you don't do a rectangle and a button, because then there's no interaction there. By doing this, you'll see when I press Shift A, it took and it surrounded it in a frame. And now I can go in and say, oh, this is a button, and the button is going to be a particular color. And in fact, right now, I'll start showing you a design token. Because if I know that I'm going to be using a color a whole bunch throughout, I might as well set it right up. And this is the start of like what might be included in your design library. So if I go to, I have nothing selected, I see local variables, I click on this and I go down to the bottom. I'll just create a quick one, and I'll say I want a color variable. Oh, it looks like I was doing one. Let me delete the one I had there. Color variable. And if I were creating a bunch of these, I might say this is, we'll go with that red 100, and I'll say, red 100 looks like this. But now if I want to use this, I'm just deleting some nodes and stuff I had in there. So that's super simple. And if I wanted to, I could create various shades of that. But if I come back to the fill here, you'll see that if I click, and again, the UI in Figma is horrible. If the UX is professional, I would say this is like the worst, because nothing is really clear, right? Like those 4 dots, it says apply styles and variables, but if you're not crossed over it, you don't know where to go. So if I click on this, there it is up at the top. There's the variable, right? And so if I am using this 100 times and I click off and I go back to local variables and I, of course, update this, it's going to find every instance throughout and update it. So it's just a different way. It's almost like color styles if you've used them. It's just a higher level. But I'm going to say that this button, in fact, I'm going to select it. Yeah. This button, this is another thing I absolutely love. Do you see how I selected this? And I want to change the black to white, but I don't want to select it. If you look in Figma, it says, oh, the colors you have selected are black and white. And I can just say, a red. I actually want that white. Like I don't even have to select anything to change colors. But this is perhaps something that I want to use over and over again. So we get into building a reusable item. And if I go up, you'll see it says frame. Over here, I'm going to change the name. If you are using Figma, don't use the browser version because a lot of the keyboard shortcuts don't work. But so I have the downloaded version, but I'm pressing Control R or Command R, and it's just highlighting the name, and I'm going to call this button. And then I am going to call it /red. And the reason I'm using the slash, and again, I'm kind of doing this stuff at rapid speed, but the reason you use the slash is because if you name other buttons like button/green, button/yellow, you actually create a category called button. and then they all appear underneath it. So if you have, print, default, or whatever, you can build categories for saving these. Okay, so I have it selected and I'm going up here to the upper right of the properties panel and I'm saying create a component. It now has these 4 diamonds on it. And if I use this by just Option or Alt dragging would be the easiest way right now. It shows you that it's a hollow diamond. A hollow diamond indicates it's an instance and that it's related to that. And so as I was mentioning before, as designers, you might end up doing this in your artwork. You're like, oh, I've got this all in place. And now it's a component and you can't leave your components in your artwork. You can, but it's a bad idea because if I come in here and I change this text and I say, this is a cat, do you see how it because it's the original, it's affecting everything. So you want to get it out of your artwork. And the easiest way I found is a really simple plugin. If you look down at the bottom of the Figma interface, there's something that says actions. And if you click on that, there's plugins and widgets. And there's something that's called, you can just search for Component Plus. Component Plus just will take your component and replace it with an instance. And then let me make sure. Okay, let me select this first. All right, so Component Plus. There, do you see how it turned that into an instance and it kicked the original out of the page? So I use that all the time, especially as a designer, because you don't plan your stuff maybe as well as you should. But the other thing I do is I look in Pages and I'll click on the plus sign to the right of Pages and I'll create a page called Components. If you ever worked in Sketch, Sketch does that for you automatically. Figma does not. So, and then I'll go back to page 1 and I'll just right click on this and say, move this to the components page. And now that it's a component and I don't see it anymore, I would access it by going to the assets. So you got file and assets, and then I would just drag it out of there whenever I want it. And so if you notice, I have a category already created. I only have one thing in it, but it says button and then it says red. Like it only shows what's after the slash. Make sense so far? Okay. All right, cool. So let's say that we want to work with this a little better. I'm going to say that I have a whole bunch of things that I want to put in as components. Like maybe I'm just going to create all my icons as components. So I am going back to files and I'm going to my components page directly. And I am choosing from the bottom to place an image, but I'm actually going to go and get a bunch of SVG files. I'm just going to select some random ones. And by the way, if you are designing icons or acquiring them, you have to set up a standard. You'll see all these say 24 pixel because when they were created, somebody went into Illustrator and made sure they had a 24 by 24 pixel bounding area or resized to 24 by 24 because you're going to see that I'm going to swap icons. And if they're not all the same size initially, they're going to stretch and distort. And so if you have a habit of going to noun project, God bless you, they'll be a mess, right? Because they're all nobody's done anything with them. They're long, short, whatever. If you go to, I don't know if you've seen Icon Monster. Icon Monster doesn't have an E between the T and R. They're all 24 pixel SVG. If you go down to the bottom to this resources again, I'll come back to this, but if you go down and you if you go to the community, which you can either get from the home button or you'll see a globe up at the top, there is, and you search in here for icons, there are a ton of people who are willing just to give you icons, including material design icons. And they are already sized for you. And so you can just copy and paste them and use them in your own and make them components, all that sort of stuff. So the community is really strong out there for building all this stuff. Okay, so coming back to this, I went to the components page. I'm going to put in a bunch of icons I'm just going to grab some here, just shift click and open. I'm going to click and let go and click and let go, because if I place them all at once, they're just going to appear on one pile. So I think I got them all, but I want these all as individual components so I can drag them out when I need them. So if I select them all, if I were to click on create component, it would give me like one big chunk component that looks like that. But when you have multiple objects selected, you'll notice there's a tiny little arrow to the right of create component, and you can say create multiple components. And so now if I go to my assets, you'll see that they're all individual components that I can drag and drop. And then if I go back to these and I'm like, all right, I want them all in a category called icons. If you recall, I pressed Control or Command R to rename, just one object. If I do that when multiple objects are selected, it comes up and it says, what do you want to call these? Icons / current name. And then now, that's what I was saying, like you can change this stuff later. So if you've designed a mess or you've already built a bunch of stuff, don't sweat it. You can like fix this stuff later. But now if I go to assets, do you see it says icons? And now they're all here. Like I'm creating categories by doing that so I can find this stuff. So I'm going to go and build a page. I'm going to build something here. I'm going to say that this button has an icon sometimes, but doesn't have an icon other times. So I'm just going to, honestly, a lot of times when we're doing this, if we are just building a placeholder, we'll just use a triangle and make sure it's 24 by 24. And Google does the same thing. So I'll just make a triangle that's 24 by 24. And then I'll make that a component and I'll name it placeholder, icon placeholder or something. But maybe I'll do a slash in there so it falls in the right place. But you'll notice that since I used auto layout, I can take an instance. I can't take the component and put it in there. But if I option drag or alt drag, I can put an instance in here. And since it's using auto layout, it just automatically resizes itself. And then maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller. But if you notice, the auto layout lets me it lets me resize this automatically based upon the text. You see, that's auto layout, right? Like it's automatically resizing. And if I don't like that, I can turn it off by you can see like my width over here. If I click on it, it says it's hugging it. You can also change it to fix. So if it drives you crazy, you can make that, not that, do that. But I sometimes use this button with an icon, sometimes not. And this is when, again, this whole thing, I am eventually going to save this as a library. But what I really want to get across here is how cool Figma is at making these components, their properties exposed so that people in design or development don't have to, like you should never have to go in and say, this round of corner is 12 or this, this button is this color, or sometimes with an icon or whatever. Like those properties should be exposed in a design library so that it's a matter of like you clicking on stuff and filling out things here instead of like rolling into the stuff there. All right. So I'm going to start by doing something really simple. I've got this with an icon and I'm going to create a variable. So it's already a component. If you look over to the right, it says add, not variable, variant. It says add variant. And if I do that, it gives me the opportunity to create a version of this. And I'll say this version does not have the icon, but I don't like it getting smaller. So I'm going to go back and look at this and, all right, it says it's 174. I'm actually going to fix this at 174 just for what I'm doing. And then change the bottom one to 174. So that it's not shrinking. It is recentering, but it's not shrinking down. Okay, this is where it becomes more like this is where the development stuff sort of helps because you'll see there's properties over to the right. And if I click on the top one, it says property red, variant 2, like it's not giving me anything really helpful. So and this again in Figma, just because something's in gray doesn't mean it's inactive. Like you can double click on the property and say icon. And I tell people this is like the easiest thing to do if you're trying to create Booleans. You're like, true. But you can't capitalize the true. You can't say yes, no. You can't say it's there. It has to be true and false. And so like true, and this one icon is false. And then if I use an instance of this, you'll notice that because I use true and false, I can now like turn off and on. So you can use this for toggles, checkboxes, anything. That is exposing the property for the designers so that they can quickly, turn these off and on. There's a ton of other properties you can add to make this easier. So if I go back to this component, you'll see up at the top, it says add property. I'm going to click on the plus sign and I'm going to say, I'm going to put a text property in here. And the text is going to be, we'll just leave that a text, but as a default, it's going to say enter text here or something. That might be enter, I'll just put text here because I fixed that size, so I don't want to mess with that. But I create a property for this, but I need to still apply it to something. And so you'll notice that, now let me make sure I've got this selected. Yeah, yep. All right. I switched to the new version and now, here it is. Okay. So if I click on the text, you'll see it says, it says button. I can say, can you use the text? And you'll see it uses that default. It looks like I'm going to have to fix this, which is fine. I'll just make this a little wider. In the bottom one too, I'll say use that property. And I'll show you what that does in just a short moment. I should have not fixed this, but that's okay. I'm going to still make this work. So what that does is if I go back out to an instance, do you see that now I don't have to double click on the text? I can be like, oh, this says submit. Like I can change it all on the property panel. Does that make sense? So again, there's like just all sorts of properties that you can apply. So let's say that I want to be able to swap an icon. And by the way, I'm going to just detach this and create a separate little button here. So if I right click, I can detach this instance. If you ever have a component and you really messed it up and you want to make it like not a component so that you can fix it, there is nothing in Figma at this time. Like I'll just show you, like it's a component. I'm like, oh no, I wasn't ready to make it a component. Because once you make something a component, you can't add, in instances, you can't add more items to it. So there is a plugin that is called detach component. And then if you have a component selected and you run it, it goes back to being just like a regular thing. So you can start it over again, like build the structure and stuff. Okay, so this guy, I want to be able to swap this icon out with other icons, which I can do already. Like, because this is a component and these are all components, if I come out here and make this a component as it stands and I option drag it, I can come out, and if I click on this, I can come in here and select, is it selected? Come on. Or do I got an instance. All right. This, there it is. Okay. So did I make the other ones? Okay, icon. Yeah, there we go. Well, no, it looks like, I named one icon and one icons, but this is why you need the 24 by 24, right? Because if I come in here and I'm like, and use the camera this time, you don't want it like squishing, but you can actually, if you're building a design library, you can go back to this original button and say, I'm going to add a property here and I'm going to do an instance swap And the instance swap is going to be using, I think it's in here. Yeah, there it is. This placeholder, but people can replace it with this one, and this one only. And then when I create that property and then use it, now let me apply it to it. Okay, so I am going in and choosing instance. So I'm applying the property. And now when I come down here, you'll see it only gives me those 3 choices. So the point being that by building components correctly, you make it so that people don't have to like double click into things, but also by naming them correctly, it helps them find this stuff, obviously, as well. But here's the issue. Let's go back to this guy. I'm going to take and make an instance. When you're building components, you're often nesting them. And so I'm seeing text and I can turn off and on the icon. But maybe I'm doing something where I have 4 of these and I select them and I'm like, okay, Shift A, auto layout, make that a component. And I'm using this nav bar someplace. When I go to use it, I don't see any of those properties because they've been, see, I see nothing over here. So if you go back to that component, you can say add property, nested instances, and say turn all those on. And now anytime anybody uses that nav bar, look what they get. This is on, off. Text here says cat. You know, like it's exposes the properties so that, again, what you want to try to do is make somebody's life as easy as possible and have them working consistently as they build this stuff. Is this making sense? Okay. All right. So let's do a couple other things. And Boolean, I'll just mention that too. And I'll just build something separate. I'll go ahead and take just an existing icon just so I don't confuse things even more. But let's say that there are times when, here I'm going to do Shift A, and then I'm going to put a stroke on here, and I'm going to play with the padding. All right, right here. What padding do I want to apply? This is where like I could visually just kind of pull this around, which would be dangerous. And also the other thing is you want to stay with even values. So you don't want people like 13, 11, like you want to make sure that's there. I'm going to show you making another variable. Click local variables. And this time I'm going to say number. And I'm going to say padding, because maybe I always want to use 12-point padding. It's not anything magic here, but what happens is if I go back to this frame, you'll see there's a little hexagon now to the side. And if I click on it, I can choose padding. But I could also choose padding for space between, you know, like it doesn't, I could choose padding for the width, but what you do as somebody who's managing a library is you just name these things correctly so they know where to apply them. But now I never have to think like, oh, what's the padding have to be? What do we always use? So I've got that, and I'll apply one more property here. And so I'll make this a component. I'll add a property that's called Boolean. And if you know Boolean, it just means true, you see something, and false, you don't. And so I'm going to take this guy right here, just I'm going to say create property, and I'm going to take just that icon in here, and I'm going to say, again, figuring out this because there it is. I am, no. I could do it there, but I'm trying to find where they put the, ooh, there it is. Appearance, come in here. And this is recorded, guys, but I'm going to say Boolean, which means that when and I can change the name of that. Like I'll go into the settings and say show icon or whatever. But if I use an instance of this, you'll see now that that does the same thing as me creating a variant basically, but I didn't have to do a variant. It just like turned off or on. So if you have stuff you want off or on, you can do it there. Okay, let me make sure because I've got 3 minutes here. I want to just do a style for text and then I'll save this as a library. So I've been creating this text and if you notice, you've got all your text properties over here. All these fonts, they come from Google plus your system. But you can set up all your properties, whatever you want. I'll just make something like really bad, like Irish Grover. But if I want to save this as a style, I click on the apply styles, I click the plus sign, and Pav here, he was mentioning he goes into his developer files and sees what they call the styles and calls them. Like you want to talk to your developers, you don't want to come up with random names like cool headline. You want it like H1, H2, maybe mobile / H1, because you can put the slash in style names too and create categories. But I'm just going to call this button / default. And I can give a description if I want, but I create a style. And now anytime I want to use it, I am going to use the 4 dots and then I'll see that text there that I can apply it. So, I've done a few things here and I want to use this in another file. So what I do is if this is my art file, I might, like we're going to do this quick down and dirty. I'm just going to leave it with all this stuff in here, which is not what you would normally do. You can organize, like if you go to the components page, you can organize things better by using sections or frames. Like you can say, these are my mobile items here, and you'll see that when I go to assets now, I have a section called mobile, yet it's the same thing as putting slashes. So you organize this, obviously, but if I want to make this a library, I come over here and I save it, and I'll call it, says on title, I'll call it junk, and then I want to make sure I put it inside of, here, I'm going to go back to that. Let me go open that up. I am going to move this to a project. So if I try to publish this library, it's going to say, you have to move it to a team because it's in drafts right now. So I'm going to say, okay, use it in this. I want to make sure, because yesterday I put it in my playground and it didn't work. So I want to make sure it's not some weird problem. We'll say class projects. Okay. And it finds all my styles and all my components. I can check to, they should check automatically to export. I'm not quite sure why mine is being finicky about this. It should have been all checked, but I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And so you do want it, if you have more than 2 or 3 people working, you want to get the organizational version of Figma so that you're all on the same team, so you can all share the same library. And if I go ahead and I create a new file and I want to use that library, I just go to assets and I click on the little book, and then I can find any libraries that, let's see, my teams, and we'll see, there it is, junk. Okay, I found them all, adds them to the file. And now I'm building in here. I'm like, I want to use this. There's everything ready. I want to use this. And if I need to fix it, and I come up here and I say, all right, this instance, it's a little funky. I'm going to go back to the original and I'm going to fix it. I can just click to go back and tweak it, and then it'll update. So like if I go in here and I'm like, oh, this one is going to be a different color. Let me just pick this. And then I would have to republish it. I'd have to say, publish the library again. It says, oh, that was changed. Fine, that's fine. I go back to that other file. It doesn't update it. It gives me a little blue dot saying there is something that needs to be updated, and I can choose at that time to update it. But if you have an organization, you can lock people down from doing it. you know, so you can make a decision whether you want them in there hacking away at variables and type styles and all that stuff. Did that give you a good idea? Because I went 2 minutes over. But like I said, if you have questions, I think I have to scoot. I don't know what's going on. Is there another second coming right in? Probably. But I'll be downstairs. So if you have questions, we're one of the sponsors. And like I said, we have Figma classes going on all the time. We have 3 beginner, intermediate, design systems. And I'm just telling everyone, like my email's jsmith@AGI Training. If you decide you want to take the class, send me, like go on our website, agitraining.com, pick out the class and send me an email because I'll give you a 20% discount, you know, but we don't really have a discount code for that. I'll just like send it through the back end. But it's helpful. And even if you've used Figma and you've never taken a basic class, I would recommend it because there's only 6 or 7 people in it. It's live, it's dynamic, you're working on projects. We have you join a team, we see what you're doing, and it's actually really good. All right, good? Awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.